All right, Dream Think Doers, this is going to be fun. My guest today is Kindra Hall. Kindra is the president and chief storytelling officer of Steller Collective, which is a consulting firm focused on the strategic application of storytelling. I love every word in that sentence. Are you kidding me? Kindra believes that good storytelling is the answer to so many of today's communication challenges. She is a speaker and trainer, and she's trusted by global brands. I get the words out here. Global brands like Facebook, Hilton Hotels, Target, Berkshire Hathaway, and oh yeah, Harvard Business School, just to name a few. Kindra helps these organizations to better communicate the value of their company, their products, and their individuality, all through strategic storytelling. Her much anticipated book called Stories That Stick will be released later this month by Harper Leadership. And most importantly, Kindra lives in Manhattan with her husband and their two adorable kiddos. And when she's not traveling around the world speaking, she usually can be found at a spin class or in Central Park with the fam. I'm excited about this, so let's get to it. Kindra, welcome to Dream Think Do.
I'm so excited to be here. That's like my motto. I need a shirt with that on it.
You do need a shirt or a mug. I don't even have my mug here on my desk. I should. Doggone it. Props.
I definitely need a mug.
Exactly. We will work on that. So I love it. Stories are my life. I love stories and all of that. And as I dug into your own story, it sounds like your passion for storytelling actually started at a pretty young age in the family truckster.
Yeah. So I know, right? It was, so what happened was, I had an assignment for 5th grade. It was right at the end of the school year, and I grew up in Minnesota. So it was like springtime. So we had just seen the first blade of grass.
Yeah.
Right, which was very
exciting. This is
an
exciting thing in the Midwest after a winter.
It was exciting after like 10 months of just snow. Okay. So I exaggerated that a little bit.
A little bit, but that's okay. I'm with you.
It's pretty accurate. But we had, it was a storytelling lesson. So we were supposed to choose a children's book and then go read it to a 3rd grade class. So I walked into my 3rd grade class that I was supposed to be reading the story to. And they, of course, it was right at the end of the day. Everybody was waiting for the bus. They were bouncing off the walls. Yeah. And I just put the book down and just started telling the story. And I noticed in that moment that it took only just a few sentences of the story to capture the attention of those 3rd graders. So my mother, hearing about my storytelling prowess in this 3rd grade classroom as a
nailed it in 5th grade,
she went to the library, the local library, and checked out cassette tapes of a storytelling festival. Yes, right? And so we were in our family minivan driving to our cabin in northern Minnesota, and my dad was listening to a Twins game. My mom was trying to read a book. I was reading a book. My sister was asleep. She could always sleep. And my brother was listening to this cassette tape. And I was getting annoyed because he kept laughing, just bursting out laughing.
Yeah. How rude.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm trying to do this and they're trying to do this. So eventually we made him surrender the cassette tape and we plugged it into the main sound system, if that's what you want to call it, in an Astrostar minivan. And we were all listening to this cassette tape. And again, it was one of those moments where there were 5 people in that van, all with different things that they wanted to be doing, all with different life experiences or lack thereof. And again, all it took were those stories, and we were all right there together. So there, and of course, just like any of our life stories, there are many stops along that journey. Yeah. But I'll never forget sitting in that minivan and all of us being united in that moment. And it was because of the power of the stories on that cassette tape.
That's amazing. And so did that then translate into then doing speech and those kinds of things? Yeah, yes. Absolutely.
So then I joined the speech team. Well, for a while, because I was elementary school. So in middle school, I just told stories at my church where I was protected by God.
Absolutely.
But then, in high school, I joined the speech team where I told stories competitively. Yeah. And there was a coach actually on a different speech team. Yes. And by the way, I should say I was very popular. Just like all of the speech teams.
Always. We ruled the school. Are you kidding me? Yeah.
I mean, think about it. Harrison Ford was a theater kid. Like Tom Cruise, like, they were all the best. Like Zac Efron. My guess is was in theater as a kid. Anyway.
Let's claim that for sure. Absolutely. As a speech kid, absolutely. Went to state at Green Mountain, Iowa. So I'm with you.
I love that. Oh, if we had been in the same state,
yeah, exactly.
I would have crushed you.
Bring it, girl. Let's do this.
Exactly. We should think about that podcast. But no, so there was a speech coach from a different team who said you should enter this national storytelling competition, which of course I didn't know they had one. Nobody else in the world really knew that they had one. But I entered in one, and the grand prize, if you can believe it, I thought it would be a car or like a scholarship to college. It wasn't. Yeah. You got to tell at the National Storytelling Festival in Jonesboro, Tennessee. Wow. Which, you know, when you measure towns by stoplights, you do that in Minnesota, you do that in Iowa. There were no stoplights. There were no stoplights in Jonesboro, Tennessee. It's that small of a town.
It's the super storytelling.
Exactly. But it is. Every October, the first weekend in October, 15,000 people flood this town. They put up huge circus tents with folding chairs that are like half the size of a normal folding chair, just so they can squeeze everyone in. And you sit there and listen to these storytellers. Now, the storytellers aren't there with an agenda. They aren't there with a sales pitch or any sort of marketing. They're just there to tell their story. And so, you know, so you look at how your life progresses. There I was at this festival. My mom came with me because I was 17, 18. I wasn't comfortable traveling by myself. Right. And on the way back to the airport, we were back in a minivan. It was a minivan shuttle. And my mom looked at me and said, you know, you could do this. You could be a storyteller when you grow up. And I just rolled my eyes at her because I thought that my plan was to go to college and get a big corporate like sales role or marketing job. I was going to walk around in high heels and tell people what to, like, storytelling. I'm not going to tell stories for the rest of my life. But as we all know, mothers are always right.
Always right. Always right. Because my mom listens to this show, and Dolores Matthews is always right.
Always right.
That is awesome. So I love, obviously I love the story. I love your parents were involved with it. I love there was a minivan, 2 minivans involved. So there's something there. I love the thread, right? The thread of the minivan. You need like corporate sponsorship from Chrysler, obviously. So let's work on that. But at what point, because I know you did go into corporate, right? Like you were an executive within the corporate world, but when did you start to realize stories were so critical from an organizational and corporate perspective? Because obviously you could move a room and see individuals lean in as you're telling these stories, but when did it start to click for you that this was a bigger tool that needed to be like capitalized on and recognized?
Yeah, you know, that's a great question. And I think like a lot of things the answer comes from some friction, right? Yeah. So I was a director of marketing and then VP of sales. In the meantime, I was still telling stories at festivals. I taught a few storytelling classes at the community college. Like, it was still a part of what I did. I wrote stories on my MySpace blog.
Oh my gosh, cutting edge technology. Are you kidding me? Absolutely. It really was. You own MySpace.
I know, right? So then, you know, when I was in these roles, it was 2007, 2008, which to be VP of sales in 2007, 2008 was not fun.
Right.
And I found myself doubling down on telling more stories, telling stories about the products, telling stories about what it could mean in somebody's life. And I would say that and it pulled us, you know, we survived the recession. Everything was great.
Yeah.
But there was still some pushback, as there always is. And I feel like sometimes the pushback is external. Sometimes it's internal within us, where we think stories can't really be the answer. Like, stories are the fluff. Like, that's the extra thing. Story can't actually be the thing that makes the difference. So I was feeling this tension, that really the stories were what mattered most. And maybe that strategy wasn't being highly valued where I was. And ultimately, you know, sometimes you're called. I'm sure our listeners here feel that called, like that there is this. I was so fortunate. One of my favorite books is Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, where she talks about how ideas find us and they find a home. And I was so fortunate because this thing about storytelling found me when I was 11, and it was very persistent, and it held on to me very tightly. And so, you know, when I got to that point, I didn't know what it would look like to become a storyteller, but I knew it was something I needed to pursue. So I went in, I quit my job.
Wow.
And then a week later, I found out I was pregnant.
Congratulations. Wait, what?
Yeah. So that's, you know, there you go. That's a tough spot to be too, because now suddenly I didn't really have a clear, let me tell you, there is not, and I, again, for the listeners, there was not a clear cut path to becoming a professional storyteller on any sort of scale. Like I called one of my storytelling friends and mentors that I had met at the festivals, that I had met going to storytelling conferences, and his advice to me to becoming a professional storyteller was to develop a program, a storytelling set that would be appropriate for kindergarteners through second grade. And then a program that would be a set of stories that was appropriate from third grade to fifth graders, which is great advice, but it was wrong for me.
Oh, yeah. Right.
That was not what I was trying. So you can see, like, there wasn't a path. Like if you're looking at, you know, if you're supposed to take the road less traveled, there wasn't a road.
Right.
Exactly. Bunch of weeds.
Yeah, exactly.
I just started walking and following, going deeper where the message seemed to be resonating, and taking any little piece of advice I could get that eventually brought me here to you.
Ta-da! And here we are, which is fantastic. And I so agree. And it's amazing, you know, that we've gotten to talk with so many different people in so many different areas. And usually the best stories start with, I wasn't sure what the eventual steps would be. I just knew what the next one was going to be.
Yeah.
And said I took that, and it just continued to go from there. And I think as a recovering perfectionist, I know it, you know, the temptation is always to wait until you have it all figured out, which if you wait till it's all figured out, you're going to be waiting a long time. So I love that is your story, which doesn't surprise me at all. Now let's talk about it. Because obviously now you're speaking to organizations like Target and Facebook and Hilton, all of these. And it's resonating with them. They know they've got to tell their story. And you look at story and culture, story's always been the way that we share ideas, right? That makes those ideas portable. But obviously for a large organization or even the individual, we have to be able to tell our story so others can understand it and tell that story. What would you say? I know your book's coming out, Stories That Stick. That's I think my second time to mention it, but we'll mention it numerous times here because it's coming.
Every time you take a drink of a sample,
Exactly.
there you go.
That's our target. Exactly. Available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, noon at Target, right? All right, so let's start to talk about some of the strategies. Whether somebody's got an organization they're running and they know they've got to get their story out as a part of their brand, or whether it's the individual taking a stand for themselves within an organization. What are some of the key elements that you find are just imperative to include as we tell the story?
So that's a great question. There's several of those big questions that the book Stories That Stick does answer. On one of the big areas is the 4 different types of stories that businesses need to tell. And another one of those big areas, those things that we tackle, is what makes a great story. Because here's the reality is, I know I'm not the only person talking about storytelling. The great news is storytelling as a strategy in business is becoming more acceptable. People are talking about it. This is something that people are trying to figure out what to do. Great for me means job security, right? But it also means my dad's finally proud of me. Like, this is a good thing. The problem is so much of what we know, or so much of what is talked about, when it comes to storytelling in business, started in business. It started in marketing. It started in sales. So you remember from my story, I started at storytelling festivals, you know, where we weren't talking about marketing copy. We were talking about what creates a story that people would sit on half of a chair for 2 hours to listen to.
Right.
So there really are, and this is based on our original research that we did at the Steller Collective, is to really test, like, what are the components that make a stellar, that make a story that stick. So one of them is your stories need to have identifiable characters. There needs to be people in your stories, or one person, better yet, just one person. Here's where this is a problem that bigger brands face, is they talk in a broad, general, we as a company. Okay, so that's fine. And there is a time and a place for that. All right. So you need to have those messages. But if you want to be telling a story, we don't connect with companies. We don't visualize like buildings, or we want to see the people. So whenever possible, to include people or one person in the story, so that your listener can identify with that person, so that your listener can think to themselves, if you're telling a value story where you're trying to express the value that your product or service offers, so that they can see themselves in that story. So you can tell I feel very strongly about that.
It's awesome. I love it. So like, I want to keep just going on what makes a great story, but let's take a step to specifics. Give me an example. Like, of course, I'm guessing most people think of Steve Jobs, right? Yeah. Like, okay, Steve Jobs, Apple, get it. What would be another example of a company or an organization being able to point to an individual if they're telling their story, to be able to pull out that character, to be able to point to that character?
I think that's great. And the characters can vary. So in some cases, the character is the founder. Let us get to know the person who started it, whether you are that person, like if your company, we want to know you. If this is a huge brand, we want to know, because I think the line is, unless you were the first incidence of immaculate incorporation, there is a person who started it. Right. So for founder stories, those people are often the founders. So that's one of the things that Steve Jobs does. So we'll think about any of these big brands, we know that character and we know about them. We know that, and eventually they go on to make movies about you, but you don't have to, and that's another important thing. It doesn't have to be movie worthy. It just has to be, because think about it, the stories that we connect with are the ones that our friends tell us at a barbecue, or
absolutely. Well, and I'm thinking, for an organization, I'm guessing founders are a great example. I'm also guessing like that customer service, that person that just pulls out all the stops on some customer service story. Like, that's why you resonate with those things, is to go, I like her. Exactly. Or I like that organization more because I like her, or I like him.
That person.
Exactly right. And you do see people do that. Yeah. As far as, and within, an advertising campaign or whatever, pulling out that individual. So I love it. Okay. So identifiable characters. I love it. What's next?
Okay. So this is in no particular order.
That's okay.
Remember the order that I put them in. But the next thing that we really need to have, so ultimately what these 4 components that we'll talk about here, what these 4 components do, your goal is to draw your listeners, your audience, whoever that may be, whether they're reading it, whether they're watching it, whether they're listening to you say it at a team meeting or at a sales pitch. You're trying to draw them into this story and engage what I call the co-creative process. So they're sitting there and they're starting to picture this identifiable character. Now, of course, they don't have your images, because you shouldn't be putting them up on the screen. You should just be telling them about it. So they're adding images from their own minds, from their own lives to your story, which helps in the effort to have them picturing themselves in the story, right? Because they're picturing their own life. So that's what this is all adding up to.
Now, can I break? I'm so fascinated by this. I'm glad that we have 3 hours to do this interview.
Yeah.
So, like, one of my thoughts on that then is that's interesting from the standpoint, like, if you're doing this, I'm sure some people are thinking, okay, what would my PowerPoint slides look like? What does my keynote look like? And I'm thinking, like, with something like that, I'm guessing, and I don't want, tell me if I'm wrong, but you're saying then not so much put up an exact or a specific person's picture, but more metaphor, like photo, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. So this is, and I love getting this far down into tactics, and people challenge me on this. So, and this is a mistake that people make. So if you're putting together a PowerPoint presentation, you're putting it together. You're like, I'm going to tell a story. I'm going to tell a story about my kids at Halloween.
Right.
So I will put in a picture of my kids at Halloween. Okay. That is your instinct, and that instinct is wrong. Instead, what you should put in is like a picture of a jack-o'-lantern candy bucket. Okay. Just like, and like you can get great free stock footage on unsplash.com. Just thank the authors or the photographers when you use there, but something, because that's the thing, is you don't want them to be picturing your kids. You want them to be picturing their own kids.
Yeah.
So if you put up a picture of your kids,
huge.
then they'll just be picturing it. And see, here's the thing. They'll get it. They'll see the picture of the jack-o'-lantern, and they'll be like, okay. And then what that does is redirect their attention to your incredible storytelling skill.
I'm in. I love it. Okay, so cool. All right.
Worth the 3 hours, right?
Exactly right. I love it. All right. So what else have we got? Like the identifiable.
Okay, so we did identifiable characters.
Creative process. So you're inviting them in. You're allowing their brain to fill in the blanks that you're leaving strategically. So they're more on the edge of their seat. They're creating it with you. Where do we go from there?
So to get that, to achieve that goal, we need identifiable characters. The second component that you need to have is authentic emotion. A mistake that will happen when telling stories is we'll just go through and say the things that happened. So we did this, and then we did this, and then this happened, and then this happened. Well, that's fine, but part of that co-creative process is to make your listener feel what this is all about. And this is the strength of storytelling, particularly when it comes to sales, is you can't always, for example, you can tell people that you have excellent customer service, but they don't know what that means until they say yes to you. So how do you make them, but if you're in a sales pitch, they haven't said, by nature of the conversation, they haven't said yes to you yet. So you're stuck unless you can find a way to bridge that gap and make them feel what excellent customer service could mean in their lives. This is where storytelling comes in, and this is where authentic emotion comes in. So you can tell a story of a time that someone didn't receive excellent customer service and the stress that caused them. Maybe they needed something in the middle of the night. And they were desperate to get it. We've all lost sleep in the middle of the night because there was nothing. Gosh, I just had this happen recently. We found out on a Sunday that a package of books that we were sending to an event hadn't arrived. And I was in Southern California. At the time, I was traveling to DC. And it was a Sunday morning. There is no way that you can reach the post office on a
nobody talking to you on a Sunday morning.
It's not going to happen, right? So it was a full 24 hours of stress and anxiety, and what are we going to do, right? So you can tell that story and include that emotion in there. One other thing I'd like to note about this component, authentic emotion, and this is, again, where there can be some misconceptions. This is not saying that it has to be a huge, tragic, tearjerker of a story.
Right.
Authentic emotion is hope. Authentic emotion is nervousness. Authentic emotion is that twinge of guilt or curiosity, or, again, you're not going big screen here. You want to connect with people, and people have felt all those things.
Well, and I love to that point, I think that also goes back to some of what you were saying, where the roots of this are from storytelling festivals as opposed to business meetings and business conferences. Because
Yeah.
so often in a business setting, either people shift into rote information, right? Rote relaying of information, or they almost don't want to show too much emotion because in sometimes business contexts is that might even be seen as weakness, right? If
Right.
you're too excited or if you're whatever. But it's that whole thing of we all know, and I think people have become more and more sensitive to, either the pitch or the presentation where it's like, this has been given 1,000 times, or
Yeah.
this guy's just trying to sell me something versus the person who's fully present, who's being real and authentic. That just draws people in, and it shouldn't be revolutionary. But
No.
when it happens, that's when people go, wow, I am all in, and and connecting with that person. So I think it's so true. But I would imagine, especially as you're teaching people this, there's an element where they have to give themselves permission to actually show that authentic emotion, and maybe even work hard to be present in the moment to show
Yeah.
that authentic emotion.
Yeah, I think that storytelling solves two big problems that you just mentioned there. Number one, um, when you are working, and I focus on strategic, intentional storytelling, right? That
Yeah.
like there's stories that you just like you tell, which is
Yeah.
great. There's
I
but
was
then
at the store the other night. Yeah.
exactly. And sometimes and then there are those other stories that you're like, I know that I this is the objective I have, and I know that this story will take my audience there.
Yeah.
Whether that's internally as a leadership message, whether that's with a customer, whatever. So you have your set of stories. So the two things, number one, it gives you, when you're telling a story, you're in control. You get to choose how far you go with that emotion. You get to choose how much you give. And as you tell a story time and time again, you'll get that sense from the audience too. But for people who are really shy to share emotion, this is a really safe, controlled environment where you are in control of what stories you tell and
Yeah.
exactly how far you go with the emotion. Number two, and this goes back to that really rote presentation. The great thing about storytelling, and when you're using stories in presentations, in pitches, is they're fun. Like,
Right.
so they're fun to tell. They are fun to tell, and the audience is having fun. And so you get this ongoing cycle of you're having fun, so they're having fun, and you see that they're having fun, so you have
Right.
more fun, and then they see that you're having so much fun, and then they have more fun, and it's just fun.
Yeah.
So you have control again over that environment. And so, for example, I'm a keynote speaker. I have several stories that I tell. I have several opening stories to my keynotes and stories that I tell throughout the presentation. And I speak 65 to 70 times a year. Sometimes, the content changes depending on the audience and their objectives, but oftentimes I'm telling the same stories over and over again.
Yeah.
And it would be easy to think like, oh gosh, here I go. But they're just so fun to tell.
Right.
And I tell them knowing that they're really gonna like that part, and then they like it, and then I'm like, oh, this is so fun. And the story, so even if you have done it time and time again, stories can breathe, the story itself will breathe life into the story
Yep.
you're telling.
Yeah. I love that. All right. That is awesome. So we've got identifiable characters, authentic emotion, the co-creative process. What's maybe one other element as we start to wrap this up? What's one other element that you think is critical?
I think the last one that is extremely important that people miss is your story needs to happen in a moment. There needs to be a moment, maybe even a couple moments, but there needs to be a moment that your audience can come to. There needs to be a place, a time. They need to be, the character in your story needs to walk through a particular door or be sitting at a certain desk or be in a minivan driving up the rural Minnesota freeways. Even when I was when you read this story, when I was telling you the story, did you picture a minivan?
It's one of those, it's amazing as you were telling the story, but even as I read it on the website or elements, because, the full story is not there, but I absolutely saw a blue minivan. I'm thinking back through it, saw a blue minivan with a wood panel. I don't know if that's what, but like, that's what I saw, right?
Exactly.
Because that's what everybody in Newton, Iowa had at the time, right? So I'm like, I'm growing up and I'm putting a cassette in a minivan dash. That's what the outside of the minivan looks like. So it made it vivid. But I look back through your story and go, okay, you didn't describe in detail the van, but my brain saw it, filled it in, and I was right there with you.
And so that is why one of the mistakes, I love that I keep going back to the mistakes, is we kind of scrub those moments out of the story and we tell it very general, because we think maybe there isn't enough time, or maybe we didn't know that we were supposed to do it. But by being very specific in telling you that story here, telling that story where you read it online, I made sure that I gave you just enough that you knew that I was in a minivan with my family. You would fill in the rest of the gaps. But that story, because I gave you a moment, a place, we were in a place, you were able to engage in that co-creative process. Yeah. And now that story isn't just my story now. Now it's you and your minivan.
Exactly.
It will stay with you longer. It will rather stick with you longer.
Oh, that's really good. Gosh, somebody should put that in the title of a book. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? I'm just talking out loud. I just think it's fantastic. I think it is so true. And I love that, because I do think with stories, I think that some people, because of lack of confidence or being worried about time, they rush through those things and they erase some of in some ways, those moments to just get to the end. I mean, you could have just said, listen, I was in the car with my family and we listened to a storyteller and that changed my life. Mm-hmm. Okay. It would have said the same thing, but it would have felt completely different. And I would have never retold that story. Right.
Exactly.
But now, I'm going to be able to tell that story 1,000 times because I can remember the details I created, the details you gave me, all of that. But it was in that moment. And as I think back, again, on what you said and your life story here a little bit, is that obviously that moment was important. And it was only one moment of probably 1,000 moments in your elementary school to high school career but that moment is portable. Mm-hmm. That becomes something I can carry then now as I'm telling the story of interviewing, Kindra, and then now she's best-selling author and on a poster in Target.
Yes.
Right. Oh yeah, you got to know the story of the minivan when I'm pointing at the poster at Target. So speaking of the poster at Target, right? Yes. Because we know that's coming, or Barnes & Noble, or on the banner at Amazon. I've got one last question for you. And that is I always love to ask, for a last wisdom of the week, something that has helped you on this front, to pull the story through, or how it's made an impact on you, just kind of that last thought. But before you go there, you can think about that. Okay. Again, our guest has been Kendra Hall. Her new book called Stories That Stick gets released by Harper Leadership here at the end of September. It's available for pre-purchase on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. It's going to be available at Target, as we mentioned. There's going to be posters, I bet, very soon. So go grab it. You will be glad that you did. All right. So what's our last wisdom of the week? What do you want to leave people with?
I think it is telling stories, trusting your story, putting story forward takes guts. It takes courage. When the stakes are highest, it's hard to trust that a story will be enough, or that the story is what matters most. So that's what I would leave you with. I think the comment that I hear most frequently, and the one that I enjoy the most, is when people reluctantly say that they shared a story and they just weren't really sure it was going to work, and how surprised, even though I told them that this is what would happen, how surprised they were at the response. Mm-hmm. Now, this is true for people who had big presentations they had to give. This is true for people who are running small businesses and changed their About Us page on their website and then shared it on their social media so that it was telling a story, not just talking about the company. This is true across all industries, across all different sizes of businesses. That surprise when they realize that it really works. And so that's what I would leave you with. I want you to know that it does take courage. You're gonna feel this resistance to not tell a story, but right on the other side of that story, you will never look at your messages the same.
That is awesome. All right, Kendra, how do people find out more about you?
Well, as you mentioned, Stories That Stick is available online at all of the most frequented book buying places. I'm on Instagram, which is Kindra Hall, at Kindra Hall. There I do a lot of storytelling just in stories, if you can imagine.
Of course. It's like your platform. Come on.
Who knew? I'm also on Facebook, Kendra Hall. You can find me on LinkedIn, Kindra Hall. Of course, it's Kindra with an I, so Kindra, Hall, Hall. Yeah, and I'm there. And I also send out a weekly newsletter, so you can subscribe to that at my website, if you can believe it, which is kindrahall.com.
No way.
Crazy.
Brilliant. I love the story. So good. So guys, go check it out. Go buy the book. You'll be glad that you did. Kendra, thanks so much for being a part of today.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is awesome.